Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. Camera the other way round today. Some of you will work out why that is. Well, the title gives it away, doesn't it? I'm going to do another one of those one shelf stroke rack at a time videos today. Now there is a bonus with this, also a downside depending on your viewpoint. It means you get to see plants that would not normally be shown. Normally plants come out because they're either project orchids or because they've started buds or spikes or they've actually come into bloom. Well, that leaves an awful lot that we don't look at. An awful lot, like most of them. So today we're going to have a look at, it's not a single shelf, it's a rack. So I'm cheating a little bit because the one shelf at a time, one rack at a time. The rack is supposed to mean the hanging racks, but I'm going to count it as a whole shelf. So, you know, top, middle, bottom. It's only a small shelf, so we won't be here all day. But the reason for the camera being round this way is the light will be coming towards me and therefore the plants. If I turn the other way round, I'm casting a shadow on the plants, if you see what I mean. So I'm normally filming the other way round so that I can stand next to orchids that are in flower. You know, rather than just a brick wall and a fan behind me, but it's the plants that we're going to look at. Now, to get each plant out in turn, I've obviously got to go and get it and bring it back so that we can have a look and a chat about it. So there will be little bits where I'm not on camera, where I've gone to get a plant. And the first thing I'm going to have to do is move Suck It Out Sam. And the reason I've got to move that is so that I can move this hanging rack so that I can get at the rack that's got the plants on that I want to look at. Does that make sense? Of course it does. Depending on how much coffee you've had, or not. Right, I'm going to start at the bottom and work up. Right, plant number one is a pot full of flipping roots for a start. This is a Ancelium pachycephalum. It's probably a Prosthetia, which if you look at the growth pattern it does look remarkably like one of those. Now this is a strong growing plant. I believe it's on the list to go to somebody else, so this may be the last look at it. I can't remember why. Possibly, where I've had a blooming on a plant, I will do a pop-up of the blooms as well as the plant name. But it's growing very well. You know, I mean, it's nice strong new growths coming out. It's pushing out several of them. So it's growing okay. It's done a hell of a root system. There's active roots growing in there. It's reaching the edge of the pot. It's getting to its maximum in that pot. So something's got to be done with it for a start. It needs to go in a bigger pot, basically. Or it needs splitting and going into several pots. That may not be my decision. Anyway, Prosthetias are medium to bright light. They cover a range of temperatures, quite honestly. When you look at things like orchidspecies.com, when it says cool to warm growing, that's basically a nonsensical expression. Cool to warm growing. What they're basically saying is it doesn't really give a monkeys, or more importantly, it can be found at quite low levels and quite high elevations. So it's found in a range of temperatures, which makes it an adaptable orchid to quite a lot of environments. These are not fussy, Prosthetias, they're not fussy at all. They can be grown. They can be grown alongside most Oncidium types, things like that. But yeah, I'm not sure whether this plant's staying or not. I'd have to look at my list. But it's certainly growing okay. I think the reason it's on the list to go is that when it did bloom I was unimpressed. but it is a species. I mean, some people are impressed that you've got a species to bloom. Me, not so much. Some of the hybrids are just as difficult, some of them more so. Right, and the next two are the same. Well, same. It's a division, so it's something I divided into two. And one of these is to go, probably the one I've got in my hand now. And this is Roseoglossum, and it's Rawdon Jester. Now, the closest thing that you will have come across, because a lot of people probably haven't come across that particular genus before, Roseoglossum, they are very close to Odontoglossums, but they have, where they come from, they've got a very seasonal differentiation. Where they are found is relatively cool, but again it's a sort of cool to warm grower, so it is found in quite a few different elevations. But it comes from deciduous forests, that's the main thing. And that is a considerable difference, because Odontoglossums tend to come from the montane forests, which tend to hold their leaves and got the moisture and everything. So these come from a very wet, shady environment during the wet season, but during the drier season, because they're deciduous forests, they get a lot of light, and it's possible that that light triggers the blooms. But most of the ancient scrolls that you can read about this says that they tend to bloom late summer. So I find it difficult to believe that the bright light during the drier season is what triggers the blooms. But it could be, because they are quite a slow grower, so they could be slow to react to that. Now, I've had this quite a while. I split it because it was getting too big for its pot. I had a new growth on each one that's coming up to maturity, not fully mature yet. These are strange actually, because if you looked at the older parts of the plant, you would think that it never had any bracts, it just had this single leaf on the top, or double leaf. Starts out as two, often falls to one. Yeah, but it does. When you look at the new growth, it's got really strong, heavy bracts on it that just disappear in time. They're just gone. They just fade away. And it's not me cutting them off. Anyway, a non-bloomer so far, but it's good to hear that it has a much drier, brighter winter, because the shelf this is on a bottom shelf. So guess where this is going back? It's not going back on the bottom shelf, is it? It's going back on the top shelf. Let's see if a bit of extra light can kick off a spike. And because it's never bloomed for me, I don't even know where the spike comes from. It's going to come from the base of the pseudobulb, so I would imagine it comes up through the bract rather than after the bracts disintegrate. So yeah, closest, probably a very close cousin to Odontoglossums, but it does have that distinct difference in where it comes from. Sort of comes from Mexico and areas around there. So it does get that dry, bright period in the winter. Ugh. This is the other one. Well, I can't say anything else about them, so that's just a quick look. This plant a while ago, back in the old place, started to push up its new growths and put out it was set back in a pot, so it had plenty of room to grow those new growths, and all the roots were spreading out from the new growths, and they got totally eaten off by a slug. That set it back a year. But since then it's recovered. I mean, you know, we got roots, and again we have the new growth, and still no blooms, but you know, let's kick it in some light for a while and see if that'll trigger some blooms. It's difficult to say what's going to make that bloom. If it tends to bloom later in the season, you know, maybe it's when the rains stop rather than the bright light. It depends on what time of year those rains stop and the leaves start to fall. Yeah, I sort of imagine you'd have to be there. Right, so that's that shelf. Next one up. Next one up. Right, that is a Miltoniopsis that I grabbed at Burnham's last time I was there. Two reasons. As I was walking past, I think I might have actually been filming, it caught my eye because it was in amongst Oncidiums. And a Miltoniopsis in amongst Miltonias, Oncidiums, Brassias sticks out like a sore thumb because the colour of the leaves is totally different. It's got a strange feel to it. It's a different type of green. It's a grey green. And as I went past, I thought, cool, that's a good looking plant. And that's the only reason I got it. Once I'd actually picked it up and realised how many strong new growths it had, plus the fact it's actually a named hybrid, it is in fact Red Knight variety Grail. So it's a named Miltoniopsis with 1, 2, 3, 4 strong new growths. I would imagine in the not too distant future we'll get some blooms on that. Now Miltoniopsis, fussy tykes. If your media starts to go off, you lose your roots. You keep it too warm, it will stop growing, and if it stops growing and you keep watering it, then you'll lose your roots. If the media is unsuitable or dries out for any length of time, you lose your roots. You're getting the point here. And let's put it this way, if you lose your roots on these, they can go downhill quite quickly and they are quite difficult to recover. And the main reason these are awkward is these are pristine montane forest growers. So they grow in places where they're constantly shrouded in mist and fog and drizzly rain and stuff like that. They're constantly getting clean water over them. That's the thing. It's not just water, it's clean water, pure water. They're subject to hardly any feed at all where they come from, and they're quite low light. Low light is one of those subjective terms because in the winter in the UK there's no such thing as bright light. It's all low light, isn't it? And cloudy day again today and short days, combination of the two means relatively low light, which actually suits these, you know. But they don't like heat. They will stall in heat, and if you get the light too bright, they will just stop growing. It's too much for them. Basically they just stress very easily, so you just got to try and keep them in their comfort zone as best as you can. So hopefully some blooms on that in the not too distant future. It would be good because I don't know what the blooms look like, because, you know, it wasn't in bloom when I bought it. I bought it because of the look of the plant. The next one on the shelf is another Miltoniopsis, and this one is struggling. This had lots and lots of spikes to go with an awful lot of new growths. And what's happening now is it is pushing some more new growths out, but they don't look as strong as the previous set. In fact, there's only 2. Yeah, so this one's slowing right down. And when you get a Miltoniopsis slowing right down, look at your pot. What's in the pot? And I would suggest what's in this pot is staying too wet. I can see a rotten pseudobulb, and I can see a lot of this going on. Bits that you can just take off. This is showing signs of rot. So this needs to go in fresh media, quite honestly. Time of year, not quite so important with these. It does pay to try and do it when you can see some new roots. New roots come out with new growths when the new growths progress, not when they're shiny new. So there will be some new roots on here. But this needs sorting out or it's going to go down. It's a no ID hybrid, but it does have nice blooms. So that needs looking into. What I was saying about stress levels, one of the most obvious stress levels with these is when you buy them they've already been in the media too long and the roots are starting to go, but they happen to be in flower, so they look good. And because they've come out of a nursery, all the leaves are nice and healthy, the plant looks good, but it's already starting to go. And if you don't deal with it, then it will go, which is possibly... Do you know, I think that was a rat just ran across the patio then. They are around, you know, this is the countryside after all, and unfortunately the bird feeder attracts them in. Pretty sure that was a rat. Nonetheless, I'm not going chasing it, that's the cat's job, which they don't seem to be doing very well, but then they're old, aren't they? Right, next one we have, now this one's definitely going to someone else. This is a Coelogene, and strictly speaking the pot's too big. But it's what I call a linear grower. Unless you can get it to split and push out 2 new growths, then it's going to progress in a line across the pot. That's how it's going to grow. Now, the latest growth that I've grown is much bigger and stronger than anything on the plant so far. But that's a worry. When you see a... What's that for on the floor then? Must have been a piece of bark, it can't be much else, can you? You know, that leaf has failed from the top, and the other one is failing in the same manner. It's on the oldest pseudo bulb, so should I worry? Probably a little bit. What's really wrong with this is the pot's too big. I was expecting it to kick off, and it didn't. It just grew the 1 new growth. Now, there's plenty of room for that to grow on, but we may be finding a pattern here. There are times of the year when Coelogenes drink and they need a lot of moisture to push them on, and then other times of years you need to slack right off. So this had heavy on the cocoa chunks, and I haven't been using them long enough to know how long they last, and I think there are pots lurking that are in a mix of bark and this stuff. It's coming to the end of its life, and it's doing it at a time that's awkward, because it's not the best of time to be repotting stuff, but I think that could do with repotting. That's going to somebody else, so that becomes somebody else's job, but I will point it out. So that's that one, and it's got a long name. It's Coelogene Memoria Wilhelm Michelitz, I think it is, because it's abbreviated on the tag. Why would you do that? Why would you just put a W? Why would you not write the word out? Oh. Anyway, it's in my notes, so you'll have a pop-up. Not bloomed, so you won't have a picture of the blooms. Right, next one is another Coelogene. So those bashes on the roof are acorns coming off that big tree, because it is a bit breezy out there today. Now, somebody asked how this one was doing, because this is a relatively recent purchase, and this is some Coelogene. So half the tree's coming down on the roof, I think. Now, this is a little... It's got the wrong name on it because it's been renamed. It used to be Coelogene orchid. And this has got super in quotes at the end of it, so it's an exceptional version of that particular one. It's come from Burnham's, and it's now called Nitida or Nitida, however you want to say it, and it's doing okay. It's a climber. It does try and climb out the pot. If you look at the shape of the bulbs, that's the top of the bulb there, and that's the top of the bulb of the more recent ones. And the base of the bulb is going like that in the pot. So the next set of new growths would be out of the pot, except I'm dealing with it. And the next set of new growths are already here. We've got 1 on that bulb, and this bulb's got 2. So we've got 3 new growths coming off of the... Oh, blimey, that was a big one. Coming off the latest of the 2 bulbs. I'll make you jump if you're out here in the dark, and it does that. Yeah, acorns don't care what time of day it is. If they're coming down, they're coming down. Anyway, so this is growing on nicely. This isn't going anywhere, I'm keeping this one. I like this one, that's, as I said, it is a recent purchase. So it'd be silly to have a recent purchase and then get rid of it, wouldn't it? But these two latest bulbs are just inside the rim of the pot, and I've put some moss there to grab the roots from the current maturing growths, and that will serve the purpose of grabbing hold of most of the roots that come off of those new growths as they come out. Now most cotyledons are classed as cooler growers, and you'd be relatively safe in assuming, if you didn't know, that the cotyledon you've got is a cooler grower, because across the board that is most of the time true. But there are a few that are up into, well into the intermediate. They do come from warmer places and they don't get as cold in the winter. And if you've got one of those and you treat it like the cooler growers, most of these cotyledons will go down to 6 or 7 degrees in the winter as long as they're not wet. They will take quite low temperatures. Now if you've got one of those warmer growers, they won't. That will do them in. So go steady which one you've got. There aren't many, but there are a few around. Most of them could be classed as cooler growers. And there is a cotyledon specialist in Australia, got his own website called cotyledons.com, where all of the species are identified and elaborated on. They're even graded with a, you know, like out of 5 stars, how good they are for a collection. So it's a good site. And what it basically says that is if you're subject to quite warm temperatures during your summer, then they will stop growing. So stop trying to help them grow. So you feed much heavier in the spring and the autumn, and just cut it out in the summer if you've got higher temperatures, because they will stop growing and they won't use it. And if you damage your roots at that time of year, you're going to, you know, they're not going to do as well when they come back into growth in the autumn. So a good point. Right, we're onto the top shelf now, and as we're onto the top shelf, I'm going to pick one up off of the floor. He's gone mad, you think to yourself. No, this one lives up on that top shelf, but because it was in bloom, it went down on the floor because it's so flipping tall. And it's going to stay on the floor now for a very obvious reason. Now this is one of the few black hair types that's actually doing okay. I can safely say it's doing okay. It has got a few scale on it, but I took the risk, and this did get sprayed with a systemic. It's due for a second one soon. Make sure it gets right in there. But it does seem to have taken down most of them. There's an odd little white dot. And there were a lot around the base of the plant, and that's gone down to next to nothing. So the latest type of systemic seems to be doing better than the previous one. Right, so this is the latest cane that I've grown, this one. You can see why it needs to go down low, it's just so flipping tall. And this is infundibulum, or infundibulum, which is how I like to say it. But the reason it's staying on the floor is, although it's just finished blooming, there's 2 buds there which I think will push on. So we're going to come back into bloom in the not too distant future. The blooms on this I think lasted heading up towards 3 months. Pristine white with that lovely orangey gold centre to the lip. I'm getting attacked by a Vanda here, so that's why that's on the floor, and at the moment is why it's staying there. So it's going to come back into bloom. Right, so that's that one. We'll get this one out of the way now. Difficult to say whether this is going to recover or not. This is Kaneko. Now I do believe it is going to recover, but it's going to be slow. This went off on a mount, so it was on a mount and it started to fail and got left on the mount too long. So it went way down the path of failing instead of getting dealt with. So it's been taken out and put into a pot, because on the mount it wasn't getting hydrated very well, and it certainly wasn't staying hydrated. So that was its demise. So I put it in a pot. hopefully meaning it can stay hydrated better. And the little kikis are pushing on. It does push out shoots from the base, but it also produces shoots from near the base. So they are technically kikis, but that is how it grows. So, you know, if you look, we've got a little growth, so it's difficult to say which is the best way to look at this. We've got one here, another one a bit farther up, and we've got this little one here. So there is some greenery on the plant. So it is pushing something out. I don't suppose it'll bloom for some time now, but I'm hoping it doesn't keel over. I'm hoping that, you know, the extra hydration and some more greenery on the top, which will help feed the plants. It's a cycle, basically. You know, to get the roots to grow, it needs to be able to feed itself, so it needs some greenery. And to get the greenery to grow well, it needs some roots. It goes round in circles, but I'm hoping not to. Oh, there's another piece of greenery there coming out. So I'm hoping I haven't lost it, and I'm hoping it will recover, but it's going to be slow. It's going to be very slow, I think. And the two canes that have got green on the end, this one looks like it's probably going to continue growing for a bit, and this one I'm not so sure, even though that latest leaf is a nice bright green. Oh, and there is another leaf inside, so it is growing. So maybe that these two canes can continue and get, if they can get 2 or 3 more full-size leaves on them, that will boost the plant. So not doing that well, that's my own fault. I let that one get too far gone before dealing with it. That's called lazy. Especially as it's a plant that it has had periods where it's been in bloom for like 6 months plus continuously, you know, pushing out new clusters all the time. You get a plant as good as that and then let it go downhill. Duh. Right, the next one off this shelf was the subject of yesterday's video. So I'm not spending any time on that. That's the Alisara Evening Colours. And we've just done that one. Watch the previous video, so that lives up there. The next one, this is going to somebody else. This is Encyclia lancifolia. It has bloomed for me, and it has got 2 good new growths coming on it. It's got 2 leads effectively. It is one plant. It grew some good roots on the previous bulbs, but the previous bulbs were very, very undersized. Compared to that, compared to that, this is bad. So it wasn't growing that well. But it produced those latest bulbs, last 2, with virtually no roots. It then produced the roots, so it's too late for those bulbs. But hopefully that previous set of roots is good enough to boost these 2 growths, and these 2 growths are just starting their roots as well. So this should push on now. Again, a species for somebody else to have a go at. But you know, you've got your obvious goal on this plant is to start getting bulbs that look like this and not like that. So that's that. Running out of space over there. Right, next we've got a zygo, a bit tatty looking, but it's alive. Now this is the Zygo hybrid I bought as an example of a not very good plant, and you shouldn't buy it really. And I bought it to put the Zygos really to the test. Because if you don't grow a particular plant very well and you've lost quite a few, the way to carry on if you determine not to give up is to get a really good one with a good strong set of roots that's growing well. Never mind the blinking blooms. And I did the opposite. I got a plant that wasn't very good, didn't have very good roots, and looks like it was starting to go downhill. And I didn't even like the blooms that much. And it's what I call the wishy-washy one. That's the colours are heading towards blue. And since then I've sort of grown to quite like the blooms, not my favourite by any means. But I've pulled this back from the brink, from quite a bad looking plant. What we've got now is 2 two nice new growths coming out. There's one coming out in there, and then there's another one down here. Those will produce roots. Now again, I've got to take a decision here. Because these like to stay moist and don't like to go dry, when this was potted up, it was heavy on the cocoa husk. Is it going? Is it going over? Because if it starts to turn acidic, it doesn't really matter what plant's in it, it's going to start the deterioration of the roots. Slowly but surely, and quite quickly in some cases. So I'm inclined now. This was good stuff when it was thought of in the old place. Yeah? It's not such a good idea here. Why not? I haven't got the heat. I haven't got plants rapidly using up moisture from the pot because of the heat. So the pots are staying wet longer. And a media that holds moisture under those conditions is not the best of ideas. So I'm looking into going through my notes, and in most cases when I repot, that's the one thing I do update in my notes, is what it got repotted in, as well as the date. And anything that's got that cocoa husk in needs a marker against it, because it could do with replacing, I suspect. If you think I've been here nearly a year and I haven't used it since I've been here, so it's over a year old, it's got to be. And in some cases it could be heading towards 2 years, and that might be beyond its limitations, given that there are many different sorts of cocoa husk on the market, and a lot of people go for the stuff that gets sold as bedding for reptiles, so it gets sold by pet stores, yeah? And it is quite good stuff. It does need the full set of rinses and all that to get the salts and that out of it, but it is quite good stuff. But it wasn't designed to be used for orchids, and therefore you have to question, how long would it last? If it's not the best stuff, how long would it last? So anyway, we've got another zygote that's pushing up new growths. This is our bonus, even though it's not my favourite. One more, and this one is the other black hair type that's doing very well, thank you very much. And again, this was quite heavy on the scale. It's been sprayed and there ain't much left. And I'm just sort of hoping that what's left is dead, if you know what I mean. It's bodies, so I'm not very good at taking the bodies off. So I've just found a leaf that's got some on, but they're just brushing off. So it would imply they're dead. Nonetheless, I've still got to keep my eye on it, and it's still due a second spray. And the trouble is, I do see adults. You know, it's not just the white stuff, it's the actual scale. There are some of those. But it's a lot better than it was. And it's a grower. I mean, this was one of my canes. Is this where a bloom was? Yeah, that's where a bloom was. That looks like that could develop into a bud. Possibility. Difficult to say sometimes with these. Prior to this, this was the previous cane. So I did a marked improvement on the previous cane. But then we've pushed 2 more out. This was also a previous cane round here. But these are my 2 for this year. That's this one and this one. They are very healthy looking canes that are still in active growth. Now this is a no ID. It's a typical black hair type bloom. You know, large white with a nice sort of goldy colour in the lip. Nice large, very long lasting blooms. It's got all that going for it, it just don't have a name. So what's in a name? But it's growing well. It's a healthy looking plant. If it had no scale at all on it, it would be a very healthy looking plant. And as I said, it is due a second spray. Now, I have said in the past that black hair types do not like systemics, and I'm going to stick by that, but there are some that don't seem to mind, and there are others that will dump their leaves. So you take the risk yourself. I can't give you a list of those that are okay with systemics and those that aren't, because it's a process of elimination. You take your chance. But some of them really don't like systemics. But these two large ones that I've shown you seem okay. There is a risk. Yeah, so, and that's never been repotted. Black pot, looking like that, probably came from Burnham's, but I don't know, I can't remember. Might be in my notes. But yeah, that's not a bad looking plant. And if these two canes, my latest two canes, can grow up to this size, I'll be over the moon, because it's produced a lot of roots this season, so it's okay, but it hasn't been repotted, so I wonder what's in it. Now, if it comes from Burnham's, down here will be a layer of those polystyrene chips, chunks, so that stops it staying soggy in the bottom, and the rest of it will just be bark. There won't be anything else added in. There's no charcoal, no added bits and pieces, but, hang on, now we're getting somewhere. It's got these little stones in it. So this came from Marius, which originally came from Jeff. So this came from Jeff's collection, went into the National Dendrobium collection that went to Marius from Jeff's, and came back to me. Can't think why, but it did. Yeah. So that's not been potted by Burnham's. So there we go, that's a look at a shelf, a rack, whatever you want to call it. We'll call it a set of shelves, but it's a single self-contained set. And as I said, that will now get rearranged, and the two Roscioglossums that were on the floor can come up onto the top shelf and see if the additional light has any effect on them. The effect I want is some spikes, that would be good. But I may have missed my chance this year. And I do know that the Roscioglossum Rawdon Jester, that particular variety, does need to be quite a substantial plant before it will bloom. It's got to have a good store of energy, because the blooms are enormous. They are 5 or 6 inches across. They are massive. It would be nice to see them, wouldn't it? There we go. So that's one of that set. I can't remember whether I created a playlist for this set. Because the idea is this type of video where I pick on a shelf or a rack or whatever just keeps going. Every now and again I pull one in. Well, to get round the whole grow room is going to take quite a few months, and by then it might be nice to go back and start again. So this type of video could roll along forever, as long as I've got a collection to roll it along with. So that's the idea. Hope you like it. And if you're not subscribed, it would be nice if you did so. And don't forget the old thumbs up. Every little helps. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.